Conspiracy theories are dangerous. Whatever you do, don't think for yourself. Business Insider UK. Why people are drawn to conspiracy theories like Flat Earth and why they're dangerous, according to a psychologist. Now, let's listen to what this guy has to say.
My name is Jan Willem van Prooijen. I'm an associate professor in psychology from Amsterdam, and my area of specialization is conspiracy theories. Well, conspiracy theories always start with a very big and frightening event. Think of the 9/11 strikes or think of a disease epidemic. And people often want to make sense of that. They want to understand what happened, but they typically tend to fill in the blanks themselves. They don't have the information, and these blanks often involve, people tend to assume the worst. So people then tend to assume that these bad events were intentionally caused by a group of bad people that operates in the shadows, that operates in secret. What has baffled me really as a conspiracy theory as outlandish are the flat earth and hollow earth conspiracy theories. Flat earth conspiracy theory, which is that scientists have been lying to us for 400 years and the earth actually isn't round, but it's flat. And then there's also the hollow earth theory, assuming that the earth is in fact hollow, and that scientists also hide the evidence for that, and there's a hole at the North Pole where you can go in. What has baffled me is that so many people, how many people believe that and how they shove away centuries of scientific research. What I also find fascinating is, for instance, the hollow earth conspiracy theory was actually a valid scientific theory about 200 years ago, and it was also the basis of Jules Verne's novel Journey to the Center of the Earth, of course. But now, we really should know better. To me, it reflects a complete disregard of what we know for a fact from science. There's always something mysterious about conspiracy theories. Many explanations that involve about conspiracy theories say it's a response to fear, it's a frightening situation. I think there's also another element to that. It's also, a conspiracy theory can also be like an exciting novel or like a thriller or like a detective, a sort of a whodunit. And I think that also sort of explains the appeal to them also among people who may not even believe in them, because people who don't believe conspiracy theories also tend to find them fascinating or like to read about them or like to hear about them. So I think that can explain the draw of these theories among such a wide audience. Some conspiracy theories, can be, relatively, they always have an impact, let me put it this way, but I think some conspiracy theories that go widespread can have an actual impact and not always for the better. What we believe drives our behavior. That belief may be true, that belief may be false, but what we believe drives what we do. And to give you an example, if a belief such as that vaccines cause autism and pharmaceutical industries conspire to hide the evidence for that, if that goes mainstream, and it has gone mainstream actually, this can have devastating effects. Lots of parents who don't get their child vaccinated, and we now actually see in various places a renewed surge of illnesses that are preventable by simple vaccines. So sometimes conspiracy theories can go widespread, and that the consequences of that aren't always necessarily good.
Okay, so we've heard what this distinguished psychologist has had to say. Now let's address some of his claims more specifically. The first problem I have with him is that he's extremely generic. He's essentially lumped all so-called conspiracy theories into a huge generic umbrella term category. He's lumped in 9/11 with vaccines, with hollow earth, with flat earth. So let's just take a step back. Let's pursue the scientific method, which is observation of data, and let's look at these things individually. Let's go that way instead of being quite so generic. First of all, let's go to 9/11, a very popular one. Here we go. A 9/11 thermite study. Active thermitic material discovered in dust from the 9/11 World Trade Center catastrophe. Now the key names here, Niels H. Arrit, Jeffrey Farrer, and Bradley R. Larson. Published in 2009. Now this is a great article. I recommend you download it for yourself. You can download the PDF for free. You can read the abstract, you can go through the introduction, all of the methodology. They even have maps here of the different thermite sites where the thermite was found. It's very good indeed. Read through all of the analysis and results. It gets quite technical, quite difficult. So what I'll do, I hope you read this for yourself. I will skip to the end, to the conclusion, and I will just read the conclusion for you, as that's really the most significant part for me. Conclusions. From points 1 to 10, the overall conclusion at the end. Based on these observations, we conclude that the red layer of the red-grey chips we have discovered in the World Trade Center dust is active, unreactive thermitic material incorporating nanotechnology and is a highly energetic pyrotechnic or explosive material. So this peer-reviewed scientific journal has concluded that there is thermitic material and that it is highly energetic nanotechnology that is both pyrotechnic or explosive. So from there we can see that it simply isn't just the jet fuel. There's something more at play here. Now, it's very good that part of the scientific establishment has actually gone forward and shown this, because obviously many scientists would be scared to tarnish their reputation, understandably. So a lot of respect to these guys up here. Thank you very much. Please download this paper. Another one that goes against what this psychologist said, Europhysics News. Now, specifically, I want to scroll down to page 21 on the physics of high-rise building collapses. Once again, this prestigious scientific journal, they don't want to tarnish their reputation with so-called conspiracy theories. So a great deal of respect to these people for doing this, for stepping out and going for it. Thank you very much. I appreciate it. 15 years later, on the physics of high-rise building collapses, you can download this for yourself for free. Particularly Steve Jones, Robert Carroll, and Ted Walter. We all know the official story of 2001, 9/11, September the 11th. So let me skip forward to the conclusion, and I will read you what the conclusion says. Conclusion. It bears repeating that fires have never caused the total collapse of a steel-framed high-rise before or since 9/11. Did we witness an unprecedented event 3 separate times on September the 11th, 2001? The NIST reports, which attempted to support that unlikely conclusion, failed to persuade a growing number of architects, engineers, and scientists. Instead, the evidence points overwhelmingly to the conclusion that all 3 buildings were destroyed by controlled demolition. Given the far-reaching implications, it is morally imperative that this hypothesis be subject of a truly scientific and impartial investigation by responsible authorities. Now again, these guys have put their reputation on the line. I have a great deal of respect for them. And what they have concluded is that the official story does not make sense, and in fact there is unfortunately some form of conspiracy. So there we have 2 peer-reviewed scientific academic journals that conclude that the official story of 9/11 makes no sense. So there is some form of conspiracy going on. Now, we've covered 9/11, let's cover another one. He particularly mentions vaccines and why it's dangerous not to get your child vaccinated. Now, I often hear people say things to me, why wouldn't you get your child vaccinated? Even if there is a small amount of mercury or thimerosal or aluminium nanoparticles in the vaccine, it doesn't matter because there can be more aluminium or mercury weight for weight in a can tin of tuna. Well, that's a ridiculous comparison to make, because injecting a mercury-laden vaccine, pathological serum in nature, into the veins of a baby is completely different to an adult ingesting mercury through food in the gut. They are 2 completely different things. They cannot be compared whatsoever. People often give that point, oh, there's more mercury in a can of tuna. Absolutely ridiculous. No, if you're injecting something into a vein and it's a baby, it is not the same as an adult ingesting it in the gut. This brings me on to the next set of papers. You might not believe it, but there's actually 145 research papers supporting the vaccine autism link. Now, these are all great. You can find most of the full versions for free if you click on these blue links. Just go to scribd.com, 145 research papers supporting the vaccine autism link. I'll just read a few titles. Please look into it for yourself. It's very interesting. I recommend you to do so. Number 1, increased risk of developmental neurologic impairment after high exposure to thimerosal-containing vaccine in the first month of life. So this is specifically referencing young babies being damaged by thimerosal, which contains mercury. Their brains in particular have been damaged. Scroll down to another one. A pilot comparative study on the health of vaccinated and unvaccinated 6 to 12-month US children. And number 3, hepatitis B vaccination of male neonates and autism diagnosis, NHS 1997 to 2002. Now, there is a correlation. It seems to be more males and more African or black males tend to have autism development higher than women in general and higher than, say, white or Asian people in general. Now, I don't know exactly what that is, whether it's something to do with the major histocompatibility complex, but it's certainly something for study. Please check out these papers here. Another PDF I recommend you read by Russell Blaylock, a great guy, really distinguished scientist, speaking of the dangers of vaccines. And this paper he has written, you can also download the PDF for free, The Deadly Impossibility of Herd Immunity Through Vaccination by Dr. Russell Blaylock. Now, people often say that herd immunity is the reason why we get vaccinated, but I can tell you for a fact, my molecular virology professor at university told me that herd immunity is just a theory. And my immunology professors, 2 of them at university, both told me, well, herd immunity, it works on paper, but in actuality, it doesn't necessarily make sense. So there you go. I recommend you look into that. It's very different to what you'll hear in the mainstream media. Next up, I also recommend you watch the movie Vaxxed, as some of these scientific papers can be quite dull and dreary, though significant. Please also watch Vaxxed with Dr. Andrew Wakefield, the man who was initially accused of fraud. He certainly wasn't. Now let's move on to the whole flat earth and hollow earth. Now, I'm not sure about either of those claims, but what people are essentially questioning, and I don't think it's dangerous, of course you should question authority, of course you should question where you live. People are mostly unhappy with the fraud from government establishments and institutions such as NASA as well as SpaceX. So let me play you something from NASA's Robert Simmons, creator of the Blue Marble, who admits that Earth is photoshopped.
Last week, scientists at NASA released this. The shot was compiled from data from NASA's VEERS instrument, which orbits the Earth about every 100 minutes, taking measurements of light coming off the planet. That can be translated into ribbons of imagery like this, and then into one of these. And this is just the latest in NASA's Earth from Space album, which may be one of the most mind-expanding collections of images in human history. Then in 2002, Blue Marble 2.0, NASA's Rob Simon made this. Simon's job is...
It's primarily taking data and making pictures out of it?
That's what this is, a composite of data sets from several different instruments translated into a picture.
So we actually had to take clouds out.
They stashed the clouds for later and went onto the ocean. That came from an instrument that measures phytoplankton in the sea.
Where it was low, I colored it dark blue because they're low mostly in mid-oceans. And then where it was a little bit higher, it was like a little bit brighter green.
Then add the clouds back in.
There's a small problem with it because there's a very slight gap in between each orbit.
So some of those are painted on.
It is photoshopped, but it's has to be.
Then
there was another layer to sort of simulate the atmosphere.
And then there's this little bright spot.
It's called the specular highlight. So it's the reflection of sunlight off of water.
Those are the pieces, but you can't just slap them all together.
It just didn't look realistic. It looks kind of flat, or the clouds are sort of too see-through, so I just hit Command-Z a lot.
There's artistry to creating the world.
What I imagine it to be. Unfortunately, I'm not an astronaut. I've never been to space. But I've looked at these images over and over again, trying to sort of get the essence of it. It is photoshopped, but it's has to be. It is photoshopped, but it's has to be. It is photoshopped, but it's has to be. It is photoshopped, but it's has to be.
Interesting that, right? It is photoshopped, but it's has to be. So I would say that most people, they're not saying that the Earth is flat or hollow. They're just concerned with all the fraud that we've been shown from multiple space agencies, particularly NASA, but also SpaceX. So back to this main article. Is it dangerous to question things? Is it dangerous to question authorities, such as the scientific establishment and government? Or is it healthy? I'll let you decide.